Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now here, a leading food bank charity says the number of three-day supplies it's given out in the last 5 years has soared by 73%. According to figures released by the Trussell Trust, in the last year, 1.6 million emergency food bank parcels were handed out. That's a 19% increase on the year before. Of those, more than 500,000 went to children. Our social affairs editor, Jackie Long, has been to meet some of the young people who understand food poverty firsthand and are now determined to do something to tackle it.
Once home to a booming textile industry, times have been tough here for some time. Blackburn with Darwen is home to some of the most deprived areas in the country. Child poverty levels stand at almost 40%. And food poverty, access to that most basic of needs, is a growing concern.
When they're on offer for 50p as the mum gets loads of them, so...
16-year-old Tia knows what it's like to face what is politely called food insecurity.
Reduce things, which are the best things to buy because they're always cheaper.
Grandparents help fill the cupboards for the family every week. Without that, things would be a real struggle.
We never got to a point where we had to use food banks and that, because luckily enough we have family on both sides.
Yeah, Grandma and Granddad always used to fill our freezer up, didn't they? Carrier bags full of freezer food for us, so...
Tia gets free school meals, but says the stigma which comes with them is sometimes hard to swallow.
At my school, to have free school meals, like call your name out and see like loads of people.
Embarrassing, didn't you?
I used to think it embarrassing. I was like, I don't want free school meals.
Tia and her friends are now on a mission.
We're going to one of our favourite cafes.
As part of the Children's Future Food Inquiry, they're trying to find out exactly what food young people can afford and how healthy or otherwise it is.
What's the cheapest thing we sell?
Down there, a salad was £4.50, but like a bacon butty was about £2 or something, so unhealthy food's always the main option for everyone.
Yeah. From Darwen to Westminster, today some of the young people joined others from across the country calling on the government to do more to guarantee all children have access to decent food.
Hi, I'm Corey. I'm from the Blackburn with Darwen borough, and the main thing that I really wanted to talk about first of all was the stigma. Just because I can't afford to bring a fiver every day to school doesn't mean that I'm a scruff or a scrounge. It just means that my family's not as fortunate as yours.
I'm from a single parent household, and my mum, she works very, very hard, but her wage doesn't reflect her hard work. We kind of get the cheap stuff. We kind of go for junk food and frozen food. Even though we know what we should be eating, we can't afford it.
On hand to listen and empathise, the Children's Minister.
I was a little bit older than you when my parents lost everything and my mum had to pawn her jewellery and we had about 50 quid left to try and cope. But it does impact your sort of mental well-being and your behaviour, because you get much more snappy, much more angry at the world. Sometimes ministers like me have to come here and, of course, listen to some uncomfortable truths.
For many people, this report highlights a contradiction in government thinking. The minister said today they are listening to children who say they're going hungry, so hungry they can't concentrate at school. Yet successive ministers have disputed claims that increasing numbers of people are using food banks because they simply can't afford to buy food. The Trussell Trust say a third of referrals last year were linked to low income and a fifth to delay in benefits. The Department for Work and Pensions said there is no delay on universal credit because claimants can get an advance loan, which they must pay back later. Accompanied by their inquiry ambassador, Dame Emma Thompson, the children took their charter to Downing Street. Wider access to free school meals and an independent food watchdog among their asks. The DWP have welcomed the report and say they've already taken steps to tackle food inequality.
Jackie Long reporting. Well, joining us now is Anna Taylor, who's Executive Director of the Food Foundation, the authors of the report mentioned just now. Nadeem Sahawi MP, who is the government minister for children, and the Labour MP Emma Lewell-Buck, who's helped secure legislation to record the number of households judged to be in food poverty. Anna Taylor, what were you really hoping to achieve with this report? I mean, you can wake people up to the sort of extent of what we're talking about, but how will it provoke change?
Well, what we've tried to do is pull together the best evidence about the scale of the problem and its impact on children's lives. But we've also spoken directly to children. We've spoken to more than 400 children across all corners of the UK to really try and understand what food poverty means for their daily lives, what it means when they're at school, when they're in school lunch queue, what it means when they're in lessons, when they're having to press on their stomachs because they're feeling too hungry to concentrate. And we heard reports from evidence from all kinds of groups, community groups, where they were reporting children stealing sachets of tomato ketchup because there wasn't any food to eat at home. We heard of children...
Or maybe even to make palatable the little bit of food that was at home.
Exactly. And we heard about children who are spending their precious £2.30, which they get for their free school meal allowance, on a bottle of water because there's no drinking fountain in the school canteen. 60 to 90 pence of that £2.30 going on a bottle of water, which is clearly madness.
Let me then just ask, after all, an MP, a Labour MP, who has managed to affect the legislation in this country, what have you done that is actually going to change what Anna has spelt out?
I introduced a bill back in 2017 and after to try and get the government to actually measure the levels of hunger in our country, because every single time myself and colleagues were raising the levels of hunger in our communities or statistics from the Trussell Trust and various charities, Secretaries of State and ministers were denigrating those statistics and saying we don't recognise them. So my bill gets the government to actually measure it themselves, so then we can start making policy to mitigate hunger, stop denying it, get the proper statistics and actually work on making sure that people are not going hungry in our country anymore. At the moment, there's about 5 million children suffering from hunger, 8 million people in work and in poverty. This needs tackling now. We can't delay.
Well, Minister, do you accept the scale of the problem, or do you think it's exaggerated?
Well, no, I think clearly both the report today and the Trust work is important, and we have to take seriously and listen to it. So one of the issues that came up today when I had my meeting with the ambassadors, the children themselves, is the issue of stigma. So we've got 1.1 million children on free school meals, but no one should have to call their name out at school and say, you know, and therefore be identified. We share with schools ways we can do that without having that stigma at all. We extended free school meals to FE colleges, but I heard today from the children that if you don't spend your free school meal money by the end of the week, it disappears. So one of the things they are concerned about is in the report is, you know, there should be a rollover, and we're going to look at all this very, very carefully.
But at the same time, it chimes with this terrible revelation that the fifth greatest economy in the world has spawned a situation in which there are 2,000 food banks.
Well, you're right, and
what do you put that down to?
We have to always look at what more we can do. Well, what I put it down to is obviously people who need that additional help, poverty, the best way out of poverty. So if one statistic that I would share with you is a child in a worker's household is 5 times more likely to be in poverty, which is why the system that we've introduced under universal credit is to help people and support them back into work. Now, one of the things that we did at the budget is that we went back to the Chancellor and said, look, there needs to be more money. So we announced an additional 1.7 billion a year, which will enable 2.4 million households keep more of their money that they earn, the lowest paid households. So we're doing a lot of work in this area, but it's also important to listen.
The graph is just going up like that, yes.
Well, can I just say one tiny point before Emma comes in? The report today from Trussell, actually quite importantly, albeit it's still a problem, but the number of people reporting that they need help from a food bank because of their benefits delay has come down. We have to do more.
Right.
There needs to be no delay at all.
I think there seems to be a constant denial from this government. You know, the reason that people are going hungry in this country is because of this government's punitive, welfare reform and inaction on low-paid and insecure work, Trussell Trust have said that they have seen a 52% spike in food bank use in areas where universal credit has been rolled out. Universal credit has built into it a 5-week delay. 5 weeks with nothing is a long time. 1 day is too much. 5 weeks is outrageous. That's your policies.
There is no 5-week delay. People can get 100% of their money.
Shame
Of course
on
they
you.
get 100% of it. What does that mean? Actually, what it means, 100% of their money, they have to repay gradually, rendering themselves poorer.
In debt.
You're right, and it used to be after 12 months they'd have to repay. We're extending that to 16
But what a disaster.
months
What
to
sort of
repay.
individual ever conjured an idea that would leave people absolutely on the beach for 5 weeks?
But that's what I'm saying.
It may not be now, but that's what you designed.
And it was a mistake, and we addressed it. That's the point I'm trying to make. Look, these are difficult decisions, and I said in that little clip you played, it's uncomfortable truths, and we have to get this right.
To what extent do you find in your report that you chime with what Emma's just described? I mean, is she telling the truth?
Well, we certainly find that children tell us a lot about there not being enough money at home, and that they pick up on all of that anxiety from their parents about that situation and the stigma that they experience. We saw it in the film. But what we also show is that there are areas of government policy where we have really good policy on paper, like school food regulations. But that when you talk to the children, there's this huge mismatch between what's on paper and what's actually happening at school.
Well, why doesn't the government make this a massive priority? I mean, it's almost a wartime problem.
No, it is a massive priority. And actually, on the point...
Have you been given extra money to deal with it?
Well, I've put 9 million into holiday...
No, it has to be much more than that.
Holiday activities and food, nutritious food, which increases what we did last year on this. But actually, the very good point that you've just raised, so water, for issue, was raised with me today. Why would a child have to buy a bottle of water for 90p? The regulations are very clear. Every school has to provide clean, fresh water whenever a child needs it. I have to make sure that I redouble...
So you're promising enforcement and more resource?
We have to make sure that schools actually do that. And we are putting the resources in, because we are not just investing 95 billion in welfare, but actually the investment I'm making.
What we're calling for here is a proper watchdog for children's foods that's really going to track all of this, put in place, really address some of the critical gaps that our young people are facing, which are having long-term impacts.
I am looking at all the recommendations.
Good. Well, then, on that, Minister and Anna and Emma, thank you both very much indeed.
Campaigners are calling for an independent children's food watchdog to make sure young people in the UK have enough to eat. It comes as figures from UNICEF revealed 10% of children don't have access to enough food to lead an active and healthy lifestyle. We're leading calls for political action on child food insecurities. Actress and children's food Inquiry Ambassador, Dame Emma Thompson. She joins us now. Many thanks indeed for joining us this afternoon, Dame Emma. I guess what is interesting about this inquiry is that we are hearing from children about their experiences when it comes to food insecurity.
Yes, indeed. That's what's so extraordinary about it, is that the inquiry went round all the 4 countries in the UK and spoke to 400 children who spoke to them of their personal experiences. So instead of hearing from, I'm sorry they're not speaking, but there was no room, but I'm going with them to Downing Street to present their Right to Food Charter, which makes all the requirements that can be asked of from government to change this dreadful situation, because we've got so many millions of children living in poverty, and of course it's a very hidden problem because there's a great stigma attached to hunger and to poverty.
What effect does food insecurity have on a child that is growing up?
Well, there are so many effects. Listening to the kids talking today, it makes you so angry and tense, and you can't focus on your lessons, and you feel less than, and you can't kind of join in with things, and you certainly can't focus on your lessons. So they speak a lot about how depressing it is, how distressing it is, and they're incredibly articulate about it. And pointing out that in this day and age, it seems positively Dickensian to have this problem. So they are the ones with the solutions, and so I, as it were, am being used as a megaphone by them to present these solutions to Downing Street today.
I guess in many ways, this isn't something that's new. Teachers have been talking about the problems that children face getting access to foods for a number of years. I mean, do you get the sense that with the introduction of this watchdog, we are, as a country, finally waking up to this problem?
Yes, I think you put it very, very well. I was talking to teachers years ago who were terribly distressed about the fact that they would arrive and the kids they were teaching just weren't able to concentrate because they hadn't had anything to eat. And it has been going on sort of underground for years and years and building to the point where we have 25 to 30% of children in this situation in the 5th richest economy in the world. So it doesn't make any sense at all. And when I found out about it last year, actually it was through the holiday hunger programme and the realisation that, of course, kids who get school meals during term time don't get them in the holidays. And so there's a kind of desert. There are places in this country where children really are experiencing the most dreadful kinds of deprivation, particularly during the holidays, but also during term time.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I guess what the government would say is that more children than ever before are receiving free school meals, free school lunches, than at any other period in our history. Is that not the case?
Well, the children I have heard responding to precisely that point, and I'm using their words now, they will say that actually the quality of the school meals is often very bad, that the average money that they're given, which is about £2.30 to pay for the school meals, is often taken up by spending 90p on a bottle of water, because in many schools the water fountains are broken and are not mended, and in some schools the fountains were broken on purpose so that water in plastic bottles could be sold. So if you've got £2.30 and you've got a bottle of water that you've got to buy, then you've got hardly anything left. So their description of precisely what they've experienced with school meals is another of the in-depth bits of reporting that we'll be delivering to Downing Street. They're the ones who are describing the situation because, like you and like many people, I was very ignorant about it until I listened to them.
But very interesting. You know, let's see if something does come from this this watchdog. Damo, just before you go, just like to get your thoughts. You know, the Extinction Rebellion protest is finally coming to an end today. Are you at all concerned that this whole row about how you got to the United Kingdom from Los Angeles has somewhat overshadowed the protests and what we've seen over the last few weeks?
I don't think it's overshadowed it, no, but I think what it's pointed out is there is literally no argument for them. I mean, we're all guilty when it comes to climate change. Our generation has signally failed the generation coming up. I was flying home from work sometimes. Unfortunately, I do have to fly. But I've been a climate change activist since I was in my 20s, and I've been asking the government for green and renewable energy, along with all the climate change. The government has signed up again and again to committing to green energy, but we're still polluting because how else are we going to get about? Sometimes there is no choice for me and for others, which does make us guilty. But it's the government's policy on renewable energies that makes hypocrites indeed of us all.
Yeah, because the accusations that you and others like you know, you've travelled 5,000 miles to get to the United Kingdom. It's going to be a 10,000-mile return journey. Other people came from places like the West Country. Other people came from places like the West Country, and they either drove here or got the train here.
Yes, as I say, there's nothing we can do about sometimes having to use dirty energy to fly. What we have to do is make sure that we change, we move and we transition from fossil fuel use, which we can no longer afford to use because our planet is burning. We now know from the IPCC, which is a famously conservative body, that we have 12 years to turn this around. So we'll all, like it or not, be flying a lot less in future unless we can find a way of getting about those large distances without using those fuels. I mean, this is a problem that we've been talking about for decades, and it's so distressing to know that our government signed all of these protocols at Paris and Kyoto Time and time again, they have made promises that they have failed to keep, and actually bringing it back to the food inquiry, which is why I'm here today. The government have also made promises to young people about food, which they have not kept. So I very much hope that our meeting with the Minister for Children and Families today will bear fruit. We've asked for a written response from him in the next 3 weeks, and after that we'll know how serious this government really is in tackling the problem of food insecurity for millions of children in our country.
Dame Emma Thompson, really good to chat to you this afternoon. Appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.